The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Grace Parker heard the whispers start, carried on the hot Wyoming wind like poison through the streets of St. Joe. She was 34 years old, unmarried, and apparently the subject of much fascination for the younger women clustered outside the mercantile, their faces hidden behind lace fans as they pretended not to stare at her descent from the coach. "Did you see her?" one of them hissed, not quite quietly enough. 30 if she's a day and still looking for a husband, I'd wager." Grace kept her chin high as she smoothed the travel dust from her navy blue dress, her leather satchel heavy in her hand. She had heard it all before, back in Philadelphia, back in every town she had passed through on her journey west. The year was 1876, and at 34 she was considered well past her prime for marriage, a spinster who should have accepted her fate and settled into caring for someone else's children or taking in sewing to support herself. But Grace had other plans. She had inherited a small piece of property from a distant uncle, a ranch just outside St. Joe that had been sitting empty for 2 years. The lawyer's letter had arrived at her boarding house 6 months ago, and she had made her decision within a week. There was nothing left for her in Philadelphia except pitying glances and the constant reminder that she had failed at the one thing society expected of a woman. She must be desperate. Another voice chimed in, younger and crueler. Coming all the way out here where men outnumber women 5 to 1. Though I suppose even that might not help her at her age. The laughter that followed made Grace's cheeks burn, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. She had survived worse than small-town gossip. She had survived her father's death, her mother's subsequent decline into melancholy, the loss of the family business, and the slow erosion of her dowry to pay for her mother's care until the end. She would survive this too. The main street of St. Joe stretched before her, a mixture of weathered wooden buildings and newer brick construction. The town was smaller than she had imagined, nestled in a valley with the Laramie Mountains rising in the distance. Cattle pens lined the edge of town, and she could hear the lowing of steers being loaded onto train cars. The railroad had come through 5 years ago, bringing prosperity and growth, though St. Joe still maintained the rough edges of its frontier origins. Grace made her way to the hotel, aware of the eyes following her progress. A man in a dusty black suit touched his hat as she passed, his expression neutral. 2 cowboys leaned against a hitching post, their conversation stopping as they watched her. She could not tell if their interest was friendly or mocking, and she decided she did not care. The hotel lobby was blessedly cool, shaded from the late afternoon sun. A clerk behind the desk looked up from his ledger, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of a woman traveling alone. "I need a room," Grace said, setting her satchel on the counter. "Just for a few nights until I can get settled at my property." "Yes, madam." The clerk spun the register toward her. "That would be $2 a night, meals included. Might I ask what property you are referring to?" "The Parker Ranch. It belonged to my uncle, Thomas Parker." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes, followed by something that might have been sympathy. "The old Parker place. Been empty a while now. You planning to work it yourself?" "I am planning to assess the situation and make decisions accordingly," Grace replied, signing her name with a firm hand. She was tired of explaining herself, tired of justifying her choices to strangers who had no stake in her life. The clerk handed her a key. "Room 12, top of the stairs. Supper is served at 6. And Miss Parker, if you need any help getting out to the ranch, I would recommend talking to Ryder Mitchell. He runs the horse stable and does some ranch work on the side. Honest man, fair prices." Grace nodded her thanks and climbed the narrow staircase to her room. It was small but clean, with a window overlooking the street. She unpacked her few belongings, changed out of her travel-stained dress, and washed her face in the basin. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror had dark circles under her green eyes and strands of chestnut hair escaping from her bun, but her jaw was set with determination. She was not beautiful, had never been beautiful in the way that turned men's heads. Her features were too strong, her frame too tall and sturdy. But she was capable, intelligent, and far stronger than anyone gave her credit for. That would have to be enough. Supper in the hotel dining room was a simple affair of beef stew and cornbread. Grace ate alone at a small table near the window, watching as the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Other diners came and went, mostly men, though a few families occupied the larger tables. She felt the weight of their glances but kept her attention on her meal. "Excuse me, Miss Parker." Grace looked up to find a woman standing beside her table, perhaps 10 years younger, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She wore a simple calico dress and held a shawl around her shoulders. "Yes, I am Martha Reynolds. My husband owns the Mercantile. I heard you asking about the Parker Ranch, and I wanted to welcome you to St. Joe. It is not often we get new residents, especially ladies traveling alone." Her tone was warm, without the mocking edge Grace had heard from the younger women earlier. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. That is very kind. Please call me Martha. I know the town can seem a bit rough around the edges, but most folks here are good people once you get to know them. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask. The Mercantile is right on Main Street. You cannot miss it." The simple kindness brought an unexpected tightness to Grace's throat. "I appreciate that more than you know." Martha patted her shoulder gently. "We women have to look out for each other out here. The frontier can be lonely if you let it. Stop by the Mercantile tomorrow, and I will help you put together supplies for the ranch." After Martha left, Grace felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Perhaps St. Joe would not be entirely hostile territory after all. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the air still cool before the summer heat took hold. Grace dressed in her most practical outfit, a brown skirt and white shirtwaist, and made her way to the stables the clerk had mentioned. The building sat at the end of Main Street, a large wooden structure with a corral attached. Several horses grazed in the morning light, and she could hear the sound of someone working inside. She hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. Hiring a man to take her to her property seemed simple enough, but she had learned to be cautious. The world was not always kind to women on their own. "Help you with something?" The voice came from behind her, deep and calm. Grace turned to find herself looking up at a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. He wore dusty work clothes, a bandana around his neck, and a hat pushed back to reveal dark hair and gray eyes that studied her with quiet interest. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with the kind of solid presence that suggested reliability. "I am looking for Ryder Mitchell," she said. "You found him." He touched the brim of his hat. "What can I do for you, Miss Parker? Grace Parker. I need someone to take me out to my property, the old Parker Ranch. The hotel clerk suggested you might be willing to help." Ryder's expression shifted slightly, recognition and something else crossing his features. "Thomas Parker's place. You are his niece." "I am. I have inherited the property, and I need to see what condition it is in." He was quiet for a moment, and Grace braced herself for the judgment, the questions about why she was here alone, the assumptions. But when he spoke, his tone was businesslike. "I can take you out there this afternoon if you would like. It is about an hour's ride. The house is still standing, though it will need work. Your uncle, he was a good man. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. I am afraid I did not know him well. He and my father had a falling out years ago. Family can be complicated. Ryder gestured toward the stable. Do you ride? I do, though it has been a while. I will saddle up a gentle mare for you, no charge for today. Consider it a welcome to St. Joe. He paused, then added, might want to bring some water and something to eat. The place has been empty a while, and there is no telling what supplies might be left. Grace had not expected generosity, and it disarmed her. That is very kind of you, Mr. Mitchell. Just Ryder is fine. And it is not kindness, just neighborly. Out here, we look after each other, or we do not survive. She spent the next few hours gathering supplies at the mercantile, where Martha Reynolds greeted her warmly and helped her select basic necessities. The shelves were well stocked with everything from flour and coffee to rope and nails. Grace tried not to think about how quickly her limited funds were disappearing. You will need a good coat for winter, Martha advised, showing her a rack of heavy wool garments. It gets bitter cold here, and if you are planning to stay at the ranch, you will want to be prepared. I will keep that in mind, thank you. For now, I need to see what shape the property is in before I make any long-term plans. Martha lowered her voice. I heard some of the younger girls talking about you yesterday. Do not pay them any mind. They are silly and thoughtless, more concerned with ribbons and dances than real life. You have done something brave, coming out here on your own. That takes courage. Grace felt that tightness in her throat again. Sometimes courage is just the absence of other options. That is when it counts the most. Ryder was waiting for her at the stable, 2 horses saddled and ready. The mare he had chosen for Grace was a pretty chestnut with a white blaze, calm and patient as Grace mounted. It had indeed been a while since she had ridden, but the familiar feeling came back quickly. They rode out of town heading west, following a well-worn trail that cut through grassland dotted with wildflowers. The mountains rose ahead of them, majestic and slightly intimidating. Grace had never seen landscape like this, so vast and open. In Philadelphia, buildings had hemmed her in on all sides. Here, the sky seemed to go on forever. Ryder rode slightly ahead, sitting easy in his saddle with the relaxed posture of a man who had spent countless hours on horseback. He did not try to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation, which Grace appreciated. She had grown tired of people who talked just to hear themselves speak. After a while, though, he did glance back at her. You doing all right? We can rest if you need to. I am fine, thank you. Your uncle's place is just over that rise. Fair warning, it is not in the best shape. Thomas did his best, but he was getting on in years, and ranch work is hard on a man alone. Was he alone? No family here. His wife passed about 10 years back. They never had children. He kept mostly to himself after that, raised some cattle, tended his horses. Good man, like I said, but lonely. Grace understood loneliness. It had been her constant companion for years. They crested the rise, and the Parker Ranch spread out before them. The house was a modest wooden structure, single-story with a covered porch that sagged slightly on one end. A barn stood about 50 yards away, its door hanging open on broken hinges. Fencing marked out several paddocks, though many of the posts had fallen or rotted through. The whole place had an air of abandonment, of dreams deferred and then forgotten, but the setting was beautiful. The house sat in a small valley with a creek running through the property, cottonwood trees providing shade. The mountains formed a dramatic backdrop, and Grace could imagine how lovely it must have been when the ranch was in its prime. Ryder dismounted and tied his horse to what remained of the hitching post. He helped Grace down, his hands firm and respectful, releasing her the moment her feet touched the ground. Let me check inside first, he said. Make sure there are no unwelcome visitors. Abandoned buildings can attract all sorts of critters. Grace waited on the porch while he disappeared inside. She could hear him moving around, opening windows, his boots heavy on the wooden floors. When he returned, he was brushing cobwebs from his shirt. It is clear, dusty and in need of airing out, but structurally sound. Your uncle built well. The interior was dim and musty, but as her eyes adjusted, Grace could see the bones of a good home. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Simple furniture remained, all covered in a thick layer of dust. Spiderwebs draped the corners, and mouse droppings indicated that rodents had taken up residence, but nothing seemed beyond repair. Ryder opened more windows, letting in fresh air and sunlight. If you are serious about staying here, you will need to do a lot of cleaning, make some repairs. The well should still be good, and the barn needs work, but it can be salvaged. Do you have money for supplies and labor? Grace bristled slightly at the question, even though it was practical. I have some, enough to get started anyway. Not trying to pry, just want you to know what you are up against. A place like this on your own, it is a lot of work. I am not afraid of work, Mr. Mitchell. Ryder, he corrected gently, and I can see that. Just making sure you know what you are getting into. They spent the next hour exploring the property. The barn was in worse shape than the house, but Ryder thought it could be shored up without too much trouble. The fencing would need to be replaced almost entirely. The creek provided a good water source, and there was a small vegetable garden plot that had long since gone wild, but could be reclaimed. Your uncle had about 20 head of cattle when he passed, Ryder said as they walked back toward the house. They were sold off to settle some debts. But the land is good for grazing if you wanted to start building a herd again. Grace looked out over the property, imagining it restored, alive with purpose again. It would take everything she had, both in terms of money and effort, but it was hers. A place where she could build a life on her own terms, where being unmarried and 34 did not define her worth. What happened to my uncle? She asked. The lawyer's letter did not give details. Ryder's expression softened with sympathy. His heart gave out. I found him in the barn one morning. He went peaceful, if that is any comfort. We gave him a good burial in the town cemetery. Thank you for that, for being there for him. Like I said, we look after each other. As they prepared to ride back to town, Ryder hesitated, then spoke again. Miss Parker, Grace, if you do not mind me saying, I think what you are doing here is admirable. It takes grit to start over, especially out here. Do not let anyone tell you different. Even though I am a 34-year-old spinster. The words came out more bitter than she intended. Ryder's gray eyes met hers steadily. I heard those girls yesterday. Small minds make cruel tongues. Your age does not have anything to do with your capability or your worth. Anyone with sense can see that. Something in his tone, in the directness of his gaze, made Grace's heart beat a little faster. She was not used to being defended, and certainly not by a man she had just met. Thank you, she said quietly. The ride back to town was companionable, and when they arrived at the stable, Ryder helped her dismount again. I meant what I said about no charge for today, but if you need help getting the ranch in order, I hire out for work when I am not busy here. Fair rates, and I am good with repairs. I will keep that in mind. Also, he continued, seeming slightly uncomfortable, there is a dance this Saturday at the town hall. Most everyone goes. Might be a good way to meet more folks, start putting down roots. You would be welcome. Grace almost laughed. A dance. She could not remember the last time anyone had invited her to a social gathering, and she certainly could not imagine showing up alone to be gawked at by the entire town. I do not think so, but thank you for the suggestion. Ryder nodded, not pressing. Well, offer stands if you change your mind. And Miss Parker, Grace, do not let the small-minded people get to you. You have got more spine than most of them will ever have. Over the next few days, Grace threw herself into planning and preparation. She spent her mornings at the ranch, riding out on the borrowed mare, cleaning and assessing what needed to be done. The work was hard and dirty, but satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. Each spider web she cleared, each window she scrubbed, felt like reclaiming something that had been lost. In the afternoons, she returned to town to purchase supplies and arrange for deliveries. Martha Reynolds became a steady friend, introducing her to other women in town and helping her navigate the social landscape of St. Joe. Not everyone was welcoming, but enough people were kind that Grace began to feel less like an outsider. She saw Ryder frequently. Sometimes he was working at the stable when she came to get the mare. Other times she encountered him at the mercantile or on the street. He always touched his hat in greeting, asked how the work was progressing, offered advice when it seemed welcome. He never pushed, never overstepped, but his presence became something she looked forward to. On Friday, she was in the mercantile selecting nails when she heard the familiar cruel voices behind her. "I heard she is living out there all alone," one of the young women said. "Unseemly, if you ask me." "Well, who would marry her? She is practically an old maid. All the good men want young wives who can give them plenty of children." Grace's hand tightened on the box of nails. She had heard variations of this her entire adult life, but it never stopped stinging. "I would not be so sure about that." The new voice was Ryder's, and Grace turned to see him standing just inside the doorway, his expression stern. The two young women, neither of whom could have been more than 20, had the grace to look embarrassed. "Mr. Mitchell," one of them stammered. "Miss Caroline, Miss Beth. You know, I have noticed that people who spend their time gossiping about others usually do not have much of substance to occupy themselves. Maybe you should think about that." The girls fled, their faces red, and Grace found herself alone with Ryder among the merchandise displays. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know. But I wanted to." He picked up a coil of rope, examining it as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. "Those girls, they do not know anything about real life. They think being young and pretty is all that matters, but that fades. Character, strength, kindness, those are the things that last." Grace set down the nails. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me." Ryder met her eyes. "I know enough. I know you packed up your whole life and came out here to start over. I know you are not afraid to get your hands dirty or do the hard work. I know you have got dignity and grace, no pun intended, even when people are cruel. That tells me plenty. People will talk, you know. About you defending me. Let them talk. I stopped caring what small-minded people thought a long time ago." He paused, then added, "I also know you are probably tired of men telling you what to do or offering opinions you did not ask for, so I will just say this once. I think you are remarkable, and I would like to get to know you better. No pressure, no expectations. Just, if you ever want company while you are working on the ranch, or if you change your mind about that dance tomorrow, I would be honored." Grace's heart was pounding now. She had given up on romance years ago, accepted that she would live her life alone. The idea that this quiet, steady man was interested in her seemed too unlikely to be true. "I do not understand," she said. "You could have your pick of women in this town. Younger women, prettier women." Ryder shook his head slowly. "You are not hearing me. I do not want younger or prettier. I want real. I want someone who knows who she is and is not afraid to go after what she wants. I want someone I can respect, someone who is my equal." He took a breath. "I want someone exactly like you, Grace." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Grace felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in the middle of the mercantile. "I am not good at this," she said. "I do not know how to. I have never really been courted properly. And I am set in my ways, independent. I came out here to build a life on my own. I am not asking you to give up your independence. I am just asking for a chance to be part of your life, however that looks, whatever pace works for you." Ryder's voice was gentle but sincere. "And for what it is worth, I am not looking to change you. You are exactly what I have been waiting for." That night, Grace lay awake in her hotel room, Ryder's words echoing in her mind. She had spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that she had almost forgotten how to hope. But there was something about him, something solid and genuine that made her want to take the risk. The next morning she went to Martha Reynolds. "I need a dress," she said. "Something suitable for a dance." Martha's face lit up with delight. "I think I have just the thing." Saturday evening found Grace standing in front of the mirror in her hotel room, hardly recognizing herself. The dress Martha had loaned her was a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, with a modest neckline and sleeves that ended just below her elbows. Martha had also helped her arrange her hair in a softer style, pulled back but with curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Martha said, adjusting a final pin. "Ryder Mitchell is not going to know what hit him." "I am terrified," Grace admitted. "Good. That means it matters. Now, my husband and I will walk over with you, so you are not arriving alone. And remember, you have every right to be there. Hold your head high." The town hall was a simple wooden building decorated with lanterns and bunting for the occasion. Music drifted out into the evening air, fiddles and guitars playing a lively tune. Grace's stomach churned with nerves as she approached, but Martha's steady presence beside her helped. Inside, it seemed like the entire town had turned out. Families clustered along the walls while couples danced in the center of the room. Children ran between the adults, and a table laden with food and punch occupied one corner. The atmosphere was festive and warm, and Grace felt both drawn to it and terrified of being exposed to so many eyes at once. She saw the moment Ryder noticed her. He had been standing with a group of men near the refreshment table, but his attention shifted to the door, and his entire expression changed. He excused himself and made his way through the crowd toward her, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "Grace," he said, and the way he said her name made her feel like the only person in the room. "You came." "I did. You are beautiful." She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up quite nicely yourself." It was true. Gone were the dusty work clothes, replaced by clean trousers, a pressed white shirt and a dark vest. His hair was neatly combed and he had shaved. He looked handsome and a little nervous, which somehow made Grace feel less alone in her anxiety. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, offering his hand. Grace hesitated. She had learned to dance as a young woman, but it had been years and she had never been particularly graceful. But Ryder's expression was so hopeful, so genuine, that she found herself nodding. His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, and he led her to the dance floor with quiet confidence. The music was a waltz, slower than the previous song, and Ryder guided her into position with the ease of someone who knew what he was doing. "Just follow my lead," he murmured. "I have got you," and he did. Despite her initial awkwardness, Ryder made it easy, his movements sure and steady. Grace found herself relaxing into the rhythm, her body remembering the steps. They moved together around the floor, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Grace felt graceful, feminine, valued. She was aware of people watching, of whispers exchanged, but Ryder's attention never wavered from her. It was as if they existed in their own world, separate from the judgment and small-mindedness of others. "I am glad you came," he said as they turned. "So am I." Can I tell you something? Of course. I have been alone for a long time. My wife died 8 years ago in childbirth, along with our baby. For years, I did not think I would ever want to open my heart again. It hurt too much. His voice was low, meant only for her. But then you arrived and something shifted. You reminded me that it is possible to start over, to be brave enough to try again. Grace's throat tightened with emotion. I am sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine that kind of pain. Thank you. It gets easier with time, or maybe you just learn to carry it better. But what I am trying to say is, I see you, Grace. I see your strength and your courage, and I think you are extraordinary. The fact that some foolish people cannot see that, well, that is their loss. The song ended and they stood there for a moment, still holding each other, neither quite ready to let go. Then another song started, something faster, and other couples jostled around them. Ryder released her reluctantly and led her to the side of the room. "Can I get you some punch?" he asked. "That would be lovely." While he was gone, Caroline and Beth, the two young women who had been so cruel, approached her. Grace braced herself for more mockery, but to her surprise, both girls looked contrite. "Miss Parker," Caroline said, her voice small, "we wanted to apologize for the things we said. Mr. Mitchell was right. We were being mean and thoughtless. It was unkind and we are sorry." Grace studied them for a moment. They looked genuinely ashamed, and she remembered what it was like to be young and foolish, to make mistakes before understanding their impact. "I accept your apology," she said. "We all say things we regret sometimes. The important thing is learning from them." Beth nodded vigorously. "We will do better, we promise. And well, we think it is actually quite brave what you are doing, coming out here and starting your own ranch. We were jealous, I think. You are doing something real while we are just waiting around for life to happen to us." The insight surprised Grace, and she felt her irritation soften into understanding. "It is not too late to do something real yourselves, you know. You do not have to wait for permission or for a man to give you purpose. You can make your own choices." Ryder returned with 2 cups of punch, his eyebrows rising at the sight of the girls. But when he saw Grace's calm expression, he simply handed her a cup and waited. "We were just apologizing to Miss Parker," Caroline explained. "And we are sorry to you too, Mr. Mitchell, for being so silly." "I appreciate that," Ryder said. "Takes character to admit when you are wrong." After the girls left, Ryder and Grace found seats along the wall, watching the dancing and sipping their punch. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing easily. Grace told him about Philadelphia, about her years caring for her mother, about the moment she decided to come west. Ryder shared stories about building his stable, about the early days of St. Joe when it was barely more than a trading post, about his dreams for the future. "I would like to expand someday," he said. "Maybe breed horses, really make something of the business, but I have been cautious, not wanting to risk too much." "Sometimes risk is necessary for growth," Grace said. "I am learning that. You are teaching me that." As the evening wore on, they danced again, and then again. Other townspeople approached to introduce themselves to Grace, many of them friendly and welcoming. She met the school teacher, the doctor, the minister, and his wife. Slowly, St. Joe was beginning to feel less like a foreign land and more like a place she might belong. When the dance finally ended near midnight, Ryder insisted on walking her back to the hotel. The streets were quiet, lit by moonlight and the occasional lamp. The air had cooled and Grace shivered slightly. Without a word, Ryder shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, pulling the warm fabric close. It smelled like leather and sage and something distinctly him. They walked slowly, neither in a hurry to end the evening. When they reached the hotel, Ryder stopped and turned to face her. I meant what I said earlier. About wanting to get to know you better, about thinking you are exactly what I have been waiting for. I know it is fast, and I do not want to pressure you, but I would like to court you properly, if you would let me. Grace's heart raced. Every logical part of her brain told her to be cautious, to protect herself, to remember all the times she had been disappointed. But her heart, that part of her she had tried so hard to shield, was already opening to this quiet, steady man who saw her for who she truly was. I would like that, she said. Very much. Ryder's smile was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then I will call on you tomorrow if that is all right. Maybe we could ride out to the ranch together, and I could help you with some of those repairs. That would be wonderful. She returned his jacket reluctantly and climbed the steps to the hotel entrance. At the door, she turned back to find him still watching her, his expression tender. Good night, Ryder. Good night, Grace. Sleep well. True to his word, Ryder arrived at the hotel the next morning with 2 horses saddled and a wagon loaded with lumber and tools. He helped Grace pack her belongings, as she had decided it was time to move out to the ranch permanently. Hotel costs eating into her limited funds too quickly. The ride to the ranch felt different now, charged with possibility. They talked and laughed, comfortable with each other in a way that seemed remarkable given how recently they had met. But sometimes, Grace thought, the right person just fit, like a key finding its lock. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Ryder would arrive most mornings to help with repairs and improvements to the ranch. He rebuilt the sagging porch, mended the barn door, helped Grace clean out the well and test the water. In exchange, she cooked meals for them both, simple but hearty fare that they ate on the newly repaired porch as the sun set over the mountains. Their courtship was unconventional by society's standards. There were no formal parlor visits or chaperoned outings. Instead, they worked side by side, learning each other through shared labor and quiet conversation. Grace discovered that Ryder had a dry sense of humor and a love of poetry, that he could fix almost anything with his hands, that he was patient and thoughtful, and never made her feel less than his equal. Ryder learned that Grace was stronger than she looked, that she had a sharp mind for business and planning, that she sang softly to herself while she worked, that her independence was not a wall to keep people out, but a foundation she had built to stand on. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the dance, they were working on fencing in one of the paddocks. The day was hot, and they had both stripped down to lighter clothes, Grace in her simplest work dress and Ryder in just his shirt and trousers, his vest discarded. They were digging post holes, hard physical labor that left them both sweating and tired. Grace straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, and caught Ryder watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. He set down his shovel and walked over to her, his movements deliberate. "I love you." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. "Ryder, You do not have to say it back," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know I love you, Grace. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you face every challenge head-on. I love that you are not afraid to get dirty or work hard. I love your laugh and your mind and your heart. I love that you are exactly who you are, without apology or pretense." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, cutting tracks through the dust on her face. No one had ever said such things to her, had ever seen her so clearly and loved what they saw. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could, did not think I would ever let myself feel this way, but I do. I love you." Ryder cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle as they wiped away her tears. "Can I kiss you, please?" His lips met hers softly, reverently, and Grace felt something inside her that had been closed for so long finally open completely. The kiss deepened, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer. He was solid and real in here, and he loved her. Not despite her age or her independence, but because of who she was in her entirety. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads resting together. "Marry me," Ryder said. "I know it is fast, and if you need more time, I will wait as long as you need. But I know what I want, and it is a life with you. Build this ranch together, build a future together. Marry me, Grace." Grace pulled back enough to look into his eyes, seeing nothing but love and sincerity there. She thought about all the years she had spent believing she was not enough, that her time had passed, that happiness was for other people. And then she thought about the woman she had become, the one who had the courage to start over, to take risks, to believe in possibilities. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Ryder's whoop of joy startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and Grace felt the last of her walls crumble completely. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in St. Joe, with Martha Reynolds standing up as Grace's witness and the stable hand, Tom, as Ryder's. Grace wore a simple cream-colored dress that Martha had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Ryder had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the minister's words about love and partnership resonating deeply with both of them. When Ryder slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Grace felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what she had been waiting for, even when she had not known she was waiting. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward, held at the town hall where they had first danced. There was food and music and genuine warmth from the community that had accepted Grace as one of their own. Even Caroline and Beth were there, offering sincere congratulations and admiring Grace's dress. As the sun began to set, Ryder and Grace slipped away from the party, riding back to the ranch that was now truly theirs. The house glowed golden in the evening light, welcoming them home. Ryder helped Grace down from her horse, and she stood for a moment, looking at this place that represented so much, the end of one life and the beginning of another. "Ready?" Ryder asked, offering his hand. "Ready." He swept her up into his arms, carrying her over the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, the house was clean and cozy, transformed from the dusty, abandoned building she had first encountered. They had made it a home together, and now they would make a life. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now theirs to share, Grace traced patterns on Ryder's chest and marveled at how much her life had changed. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. "That I spent so many years believing I had missed my chance at happiness. That I was too old, too set in my ways, too independent to ever find love. And now I am here with you, and I realize I was not missing anything. I was just waiting for the right person, the right time." Ryder pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You were waiting for me, and I was waiting for you. Worth the wait, I would say. Definitely worth the wait." The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply fulfilling. Together, they transformed the Parker Ranch into a thriving operation. Ryder brought his expertise with horses, and they began breeding and training quality stock that developed a reputation throughout Wyoming. Grace managed the business side, keeping meticulous records and handling sales with a sharp eye for fair deals. They also started a small cattle herd, building slowly but steadily. Grace proved to have a natural talent for animal husbandry, and Ryder often joked that she could gentle a wild horse with nothing but patience and determination. But it was not all work. They made time for each other, for long rides through the mountains, for quiet evenings on the porch watching the stars, for dancing in the kitchen while supper cooked. They talked about everything, sharing their hopes and fears, their past wounds and future dreams. Grace had worried before the wedding about the physical intimacy of marriage, having no experience and being older than most brides. But Ryder was patient and tender, and they learned each other with care and growing passion. She discovered that desire had no age limit, that her body was capable of pleasure she had never imagined. In the spring of their second year together, Grace realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions. She was 36 years old, considered well past the safe age for childbearing. The doctor in St. Joe expressed concern, warning her of the increased risks. When she told Ryder, she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. He had lost his first wife and child to childbirth, and the thought of risking Grace terrified him. "We will get through this together," she promised, holding his hands. "I am strong and I am healthy and we will be careful, but Ryder, I want this baby, I want our child." "I want it too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am just afraid of losing you. You will not lose me. I am not going anywhere." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace experienced sickness and fatigue, and as she grew larger, the physical demands of ranch work became too much. Ryder insisted she rest more, taking on additional tasks himself and hiring help when needed. Martha Reynolds visited frequently, bringing advice and support, her own experiences as a mother invaluable. As the birth approached, Ryder's anxiety increased. Grace would wake in the night to find him watching her, his hand protective on her swollen belly. "Talk to me," she said one night. "Tell me what you are thinking." "I keep remembering," he admitted. "Sarah, my first wife, she was so excited about the baby. We had names picked out, plans made. And then everything went wrong so fast. The midwife could not stop the bleeding and there was nothing anyone could do. I held her while she died, and our daughter, she never even took a breath." His voice broke. "I cannot go through that again, Grace. I cannot lose you." Grace pulled him close, letting him hold her. "Every birth carries risk, that is true, but it is not the same situation. I am not Sarah and this is not that birth. We have a good doctor now and Martha will be there, and I am going to fight with everything I have to come through this. For you, for our baby, for the life we are building together. Promise me you will fight. If it comes down to a choice, promise me you will choose yourself." Grace understood what he was asking, the fear behind the request. "I promise I will fight to save us both." "But Ryder, we have to believe this will work out. We have to have faith." Labor began on a cool October morning. The doctor was summoned, along with Martha and another experienced woman from town. Ryder wanted to be there, holding Grace's hand, but the women shooed him out, insisting he would only be in the way. He paced the porch for hours, listening to the sounds from inside, every cry from Grace tearing at his heart. Tom, his stable hand and friend, sat with him, offering silent support. Inside, Grace fought the hardest battle of her life. The pain was immense, overwhelming, but she held onto her promise to Ryder, held onto the image of their future, their family whole and healthy. Martha coached her through each contraction, the doctor monitoring carefully for any signs of complications. "You are doing wonderfully," the doctor encouraged. "I can see the head. Just a few more pushes, Mrs. Mitchell." With a final, monumental effort, Grace pushed their child into the world. A baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy, and Grace collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "It is a boy," Martha announced, her own voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy boy." The doctor worked quickly to cut the cord and make sure Grace was all right, checking for the hemorrhaging that had killed Ryder's first wife. But Grace's bleeding was normal, her body recovering as it should. "You did it," the doctor said, smiling. "You are both going to be just fine." Someone opened the door and called for Ryder. He burst into the room, his face pale and stricken, his eyes searching frantically for Grace. "I am all right," she said immediately, her voice tired but strong. "We are both all right." Martha placed the bundled baby in Grace's arms, and Ryder knelt beside the bed, looking down at his son with wonder. The baby had dark hair like his father and was red-faced and squalling, but to them he was perfect. "A son," Ryder breathed. "We have a son. What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now Ryder touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression tender. "How about Robert Thomas Mitchell, after my father and your uncle?" "Robert," Grace repeated. "I love it. Hello, Robert." "We are your parents and we love you so much." Ryder kissed Grace gently. Thank you for being strong, for fighting, for giving us this gift. I love you more than words can say." "I love you too. We made it, all three of us." Parenthood transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and exhilarating. Robert was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs, and those first months were a blur of feedings and diaper changes and precious little sleep. But Grace and Ryder navigated it together, taking turns walking the floor with a fussy baby, supporting each other through the challenges. Ryder proved to be a devoted father, his earlier fears transformed into protective love. He would spend hours just watching Robert sleep, marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Grace loved watching them together, her strong, capable husband reduced to gentle wonder by this small person. As Robert grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They expanded the horse breeding operation and added more cattle. Grace kept managing the business side even while caring for Robert, proving that she could be both mother and entrepreneur. Ryder often said she was the most capable person he had ever known, and he meant it. When Robert was 2, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the fear was less acute, tempered by the successful birth of their first child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and 9 months later, Grace delivered a daughter they named Lily Grace Mitchell. Their family felt complete. 2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a community that supported them, and a love that had only deepened with time and shared experiences. Grace sometimes thought back to the woman she had been when she arrived in St. Joe, brittle and defensive, expecting rejection. She barely recognized that version of herself. The years passed in the way they do when life is full and purposeful. Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and showed every sign of inheriting his father's talent with animals. Lily was spirited and adventurous, keeping them all on their toes with her fearless exploration of the ranch. Grace and Ryder maintained their partnership in all things, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the children and a proper office for Grace to manage the ranch accounts. They hired additional help as the operation grew, becoming one of the most respected ranches in the region. On their 10th anniversary, Ryder surprised Grace with a trip to the mountains, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Martha Reynolds for a few days. They rode to a secluded valley Ryder had discovered years before, where a crystal-clear lake reflected the peaks like a mirror. They made camp under the stars, and as they sat by the fire, Ryder pulled Grace close. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming out here, taking such a risk?" Grace thought about the question seriously. "Not for a single moment. My life before, it was not really living. It was just existing, going through the motions, believing that happiness was not for me. Coming here, meeting you, building this life, It saved me in every way a person can be saved. I am the one who was saved, Ryder countered. I was going through the motions too, just working and existing, keeping my heart locked away because I was too afraid to risk it again. And then you showed up, this strong, stubborn, beautiful woman who did not need me but chose me anyway. You gave me back my life. We saved each other then. Yes, we did. Grace looked up at the stars, countless and brilliant in the clear mountain air. I spent so many years listening to people tell me I was too old, too independent, too much. And I started to believe them, started to think that being alone was my only option. But the truth is, I was not too old or too anything. I was just waiting for someone who could see me for who I really was, who wanted a partner instead of someone to mold or control. You were exactly what I was waiting for, Ryder said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago in the mercantile. You still are. Every day, you are exactly what I need, what I want, what I love. They made love under the stars that night, their bodies familiar but never boring, always capable of surprising each other with new depths of passion and tenderness. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Grace felt profoundly grateful for the courage she had found to start over, to take a risk on herself and on love. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Robert, at 16, was already helping manage the horse breeding program, showing a natural gift for understanding animals that made both parents proud. Lily, at 14, had developed a talent for training the horses and a fearless riding style that occasionally terrified her father. Grace was now 50 years old, with silver threading through her chestnut hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But she had never felt more beautiful, more confident, more fully herself. Ryder, at 58, had gone mostly gray and moved a bit slower than he once had, but his strength was undiminished, and his love for her had only deepened with time. They sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains as they had done countless times before. Robert and Lily were in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal, their voices drifting across the yard. "We did all right, did we not?" Ryder said, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "I think we did better than all right. We built something real, something lasting. And we did it together." Grace leaned into him, comfortable and content. "I love you, Ryder Mitchell. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked past me. Thank you for believing I was exactly what you needed. Thank you for taking a chance on a man who was too scared to hope. Thank you for choosing me." They sat in peaceful silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. Inside the house, the lamps would need to be lit soon. Supper would need to be prepared. The evening chores would need to be done. But for now, they simply sat together. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right time, who had built a life of love and purpose against the odds. Grace thought about the young women in town who had mocked her for being too old, about all the people who had told her, directly or indirectly, that her time had passed. She hoped they had learned, as she had, that there is no age limit on courage, on reinvention, on love. That being older does not mean being less deserving of happiness, but rather brings wisdom and strength to appreciate it fully. Years continued to pass with the reliable rhythm of seasons. Robert married a young woman from a neighboring ranch when he was 22, a smart and capable partner who fit seamlessly into the Mitchell family. They built a house on the far end of the property and began raising their own horses, expanding the family business. Lily surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher, taking the position at the St. Joe schoolhouse when the previous teacher retired. She married at 25 to a rancher's son who appreciated her independent spirit and supported her work. They chose to live in town, though Lily visited the ranch several times a week, unable to stay away from the horses for long. Grace and Ryder became grandparents 4 times over, Robert's 3 children and Lily's daughter filling their lives with new joy. The ranch house rang with laughter during family gatherings, 3 generations working together to maintain the legacy Grace and Ryder had built. On Grace's 60th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The house was full of noise and love, children running through the rooms, adults catching up and sharing stories. Grace stood in the kitchen with Martha Reynolds, who had remained a close friend through all the years, and looked out at the chaos with deep satisfaction. "You know," Martha said, "I remember when you first arrived in St. Joe, so nervous and trying so hard to be brave, and look at you now. Look at everything you have built." Grace watched Ryder through the window, teaching his grandson how to hold a rope properly, his patience and love evident in every gesture. "I could not have built any of this without him. He gave me the space to be myself, the support to take risks, the love to flourish." "You gave him the same," Martha pointed out. "That is what real love does. It makes room for both people to grow." That evening, after the guests had left and the children had been taken home, Grace and Ryder walked out to the spot where they had first stood together, looking over the property that had needed so much work. The house now gleamed with fresh paint, the barn stood sturdy and sound, the fences were straight and strong. Horses grazed in the paddocks, and cattle dotted the distant hills. "Remember what this looked like when you first saw it?" Ryder asked. "I remember. I also remember being terrified that I had made a terrible mistake, that I would fail, that I was foolish to think I could make a life here." "Not foolish, brave," Grace smiled. "You always saw things in me I could not see in myself. That was one of your greatest gifts to me. You taught me to hope again, to risk again, to live again. That was your gift to me." Ryder took her hand, the familiar gesture still capable of making her heart skip. "I would do it all again, every moment, every challenge, as long as it led me back to you. And I would choose this life, this love, over any other possibility. You were right, you know, that day in the mercantile. I was exactly what you were waiting for. But you were also exactly what I needed, even when I did not know I needed it." They stood together as night fell. 2 people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life of meaning and love, who had proven that age is just a number and true connection knows no timeline. The ranch, the family, the legacy they had created together stood as testament to what is possible when 2 people see each other clearly and love without reservation. Grace was 68 and Ryder 76 when he became ill. It started small, a cough that would not go away, fatigue that seemed more than his age warranted. The doctor in St. Joe, younger now than the one who had delivered their children, diagnosed him with a weak heart and told them gently that time was limited. Grace refused to accept it at first, insisted on trying every treatment, every remedy. But Ryder took her hands and made her look at him. "We have had 34 years together," he said. 34 years of love and partnership and building something beautiful. Not everyone gets that, Grace. We have been blessed beyond measure. I am not ready to lose you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I am not ready to leave you, but we do not always get to choose these things." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "What we can choose is how we spend the time we have left. I do not want to spend it fighting the inevitable. I want to spend it loving you, being with our family, savoring every moment." So that is what they did. Robert and Lily came often, bringing the grandchildren. They had quiet family dinners and long conversations. Ryder said his goodbyes, made sure Grace knew where all the important papers were, told her how proud he was of everything she had accomplished. On a cool spring morning, with Grace holding his hand and their children gathered around, Ryder Mitchell drew his last breath. His face was peaceful, a slight smile on his lips, and Grace knew that he had been ready, that he had lived a full and happy life with no regrets. The grief was enormous, crushing. Grace had known that losing him would hurt, but the reality was worse than anything she had imagined. The house felt empty without his presence, the ranch too quiet without his voice. She moved through the days mechanically, doing what needed to be done but feeling hollow inside. Robert and Lily worried about her, suggested she might want to move to town, live with one of them. But Grace refused. This ranch was her life's work, hers and Ryder's together. She would not abandon it, would not abandon the home they had built. Slowly, very slowly, the sharp edge of grief began to dull. It never went away, but it became something she could carry. She found comfort in the memories, in the evidence of their love all around her. Every fence post they had set together, every room they had added, every horse they had trained, it all spoke of their partnership. She also found purpose in continuing their work. She ran the ranch with the same capability she always had, making decisions and managing the business. Robert helped with the physical labor she could no longer manage alone, but Grace remained the heart of the operation. On what would have been their 40th anniversary, Grace rode out to the mountain valley where they had camped so many years ago. She sat by the lake, remembering that conversation under the stars, remembering how loved she had felt, how seen. "I miss you," she said aloud, knowing he could not hear but needing to say it anyway. "Every day I miss you, but I am also so grateful. Grateful for every moment we had, every laugh, every challenge we faced together, every ordinary day that felt extraordinary because you were there." The wind rustled through the trees, and Grace imagined it was Ryder's response, telling her he loved her still, that he was proud of her strength, that she should keep living fully. And she did. Grace continued running the ranch, watching her grandchildren grow, welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. She became a matriarch of the family, a source of wisdom and strength. She told stories about Ryder to the younger generations, making sure they knew the man who had helped build their legacy. She also became a mentor to other women in St. Joe, particularly those who felt they had somehow missed their chance at happiness. She told them her story, about arriving at 34 believing her life was over, about finding love and purpose beyond anything she had imagined. "It is never too late," she would say. "You are never too old to start over, to take risks, to choose yourself." I was mocked for my age, told I was past my prime, and I almost believed it. But then I met someone who saw me for who I really was, who told me I was exactly what he had been waiting for. And together, we built a life that exceeded every dream. Grace lived to be 82 years old, sharp-minded and strong-willed to the end. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, the whole town mourned. The church was packed for her funeral, filled with family and friends and people whose lives she had touched over the decades. They buried her next to Ryder in the town cemetery, under the cottonwood trees. Robert and Lily stood together. Their own children and grandchildren gathered around as the minister spoke about a life well lived, about love and courage and legacy. After everyone else had left, Lily placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, the same kind Ryder had picked for Grace's hair on their wedding day. "They really did it, did they not?" Robert said quietly. Two people who everyone thought had missed their chance, building something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Lily nodded, tears on her cheeks. "They proved that love has no timeline, that it is never too late to find happiness. They gave us that gift, showing us what real partnership looks like. And we will pass it on," Robert said. Make sure their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren know the story. How grandmother Grace came to St. Joe alone and afraid but brave enough to start over. How grandfather Ryder saw past all the superficial things to recognize exactly what he needed. How together they built all of this. He gestured toward the ranch visible in the distance, the house still standing strong, the fences still marking the boundaries of the property that had been transformed from an abandoned dream into a thriving legacy. The Mitchell Ranch continued to operate, now in its fourth generation, a testament to what Grace and Ryder had created together. Their story became part of St. Joe's history, told and retold over the years. The tale of the woman who was mocked for being too old, and the cowboy who saw her worth, who told her she was exactly what he had been waiting for. It became a reminder that age is no barrier to love, that courage can lead to extraordinary transformations, that sometimes the best things in life come not when we are young and untested, but when we are seasoned enough to truly appreciate them. The ranch house still stands today, over a century later, preserved by descendants who remember the love story that began it all. Visitors can see the porch where Grace and Ryder sat together watching countless sunsets, the barn they rebuilt with their own hands, the paddocks where they trained horses and raised their family. It stands as a monument not just to their hard work but to their love, a love that proved stronger than judgment, deeper than fear, and more enduring than time itself. Grace Parker had arrived in St. Joe believing her life was effectively over, that at 34 she had missed her chance at happiness. Instead, she found that her life was just beginning, that the best years were ahead of her, waiting to be lived with a man who valued her for exactly who she was. Together, they proved that it is never too late for love, never too late to start over, never too late to build something beautiful and lasting. Their story remains a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt they were too old, too set in their ways, too different to deserve happiness. It reminds us all that somewhere out there, someone might be waiting to say, "You are exactly what I have been waiting for." And when they do, the courage to believe them can transform everything.